Hello guys, what is up? We are back with another books video on this movie channel. I know, I'm doing it again, but I really liked doing this last year because I've gotten back into reading, and I like talking about it. And this is a huge part of my life, is reading and writing, and I don't really talk about that as much on the channel, and I want to some more. So I think at least once a year I'm gonna talk about books and the books that I read of the year before that. The thing about this last year was I kind of sucked at reading. It wasn't actually as terrible as I thought it was looking back, because actually I was doing really well at the beginning of the year, because coming off of the year before that, I had read basically 6 books and then maybe a couple short stories or something, but I basically read, one every 2 months or so. I was doing pretty good. And then I was like, you know what, I'm going to go 1 a month this year. I'm going to read 12 books. And I was on track. January, I read a book. February, I read a book. It kind of bled into March because it was a little bit bigger, but I was like, this is all good, and I'll pick a shorter book. I was doing pretty good. And then lots of stuff happened. I had a lot of changes. I moved out. The year just kind of went to shit. So did my reading. Although it wasn't as bad as I thought it was, but it still wasn't great. Technically, I still read 6 books. So I still did the same amount as the year before, plus some short stories. But, well, you'll see. So you are probably wondering what the heck is with the setup. Well, it is snowing outside. I'm wearing my flannel. I did want to do this video, but I didn't feel like setting it up all over there. And I figured this would be a cozier spot in my bed. And I also have my books blanket. It's a blanket with all these different, like phrases and lines from books and stuff. And I figured, what the heck? And then you can see a different side of my room. You can see this is my Harry Potter shelf. I have a regular bookshelf out in the main living room, but this is the Harry Potter one. I've relegated everything to this bookshelf that's Harry Potter related for reasons. And then I've got some art over here. One of my best friends painted that for me I think when I turned 19. And then over here I got my steampunk lamp, my Edison lamp, and then a couple other books, and Deadpool. So I figured I would show you the other side of my room as well. But again, it's a cozy day, and I just didn't really feel like getting up. So let's start off. I don't really have a ranking this year because of how weird it was, and there's some, little asterisks next to things. But let me just start with the DNF, I guess, that I have, or I'm really going to call it a DNS. I really didn't even start it, but I'm just going to mention it real quick. It was called The Wild and Wicked Things. I went to the library looking for this book, and it was so embarrassing because I had the librarian look it up like 3 times for me with different titles, because I just could not remember what the title was for some reason, and obviously I still can't. It's called Wild and Wicked Things, and it's a very, actually, like I said, I barely even started it, so I actually can't even go into it. It's a witch book, basically, and it's got a very kind of end of summer fall vibe, I think. It's not the book, it was me. It was something about, well, I think it was just basically the beginning of this year and how this year was going to go for me reading. I just could not focus. I was reading some pages like 8 times, and it wasn't going there. So that one I might come back to at some point once I stop being stupid at reading. But I did think, from what I read, it seemed pretty cool. Obviously, I picked it up in the library to begin with, so it seemed like it was going to be an interesting one. So I maybe will come back to that one next year or this year and let you know how that actually ends up going. Okay, kicking off the actual list, I'm going to start off with a sort of series. Like I said, this is the little stuff of this year that I was like, this just doesn't even make sense. But I started reading a series of unfortunate events this year. Last year and the year before have kind of, part of what I've been reading theme-wise has been books that I've had forever, that have been on my shelf since I was a kid, and I did not read them ever. I don't know why. I just never did. So I'm kind of going back, and I'm gonna go through them all, at least most of them, and see what I missed. The thing about these was they're so easy to read. I was like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna read one bigger book, and then I'm gonna take a little bit of a break and read one of these, just fly through these, and then I'll go to the next big book. And that was working for a bit, actually, because I got through a couple of them, and like I could read like 50 pages in like an hour. You have to remember, I'm a slow reader. This is not that hard to read. It's very short. They're very short. The other thing is, I only read the first 3, and the reason is, I only have in my possession 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 12, and 13. Why? I don't know. I just have those. And instead of going to the library and getting the others, I just was like, I'll come back to it. Part of the reason is because of how I like the book. So let me get into that. These are really, really well done for kids' books. Because Lemony Snicket obviously has a very unique style of writing. I like to think of him in terms of what Lemony Snicket is to writing books, Wes Anderson is to making movies. It's very formal, but quirky. And they're very fun. And I love how he writes some of these things, because he will have passages that seem like they have nothing to do with anything, and then we'll tie them into what's going on into the story. I always know that there's going to be something unique, some weird connection or observation he's going to make about what a character's doing when, you know, Violet will be in the room starting to work on breaking down a lamp or something. And then he'll start the next paragraph with, you know, when you accidentally miss a step on the stairs and you feel like you're falling, and I'm like, oh, I gotta know how you're going to tie these things together. But it's so interesting. He just comes up with all these little images and experiences and moments that are so small you don't really think about them, but every time I read one, I'm like, yeah, I've experienced that. And so many other people are like, yeah, that's a really relatable thing. We just never really think to talk about it. But again, the way that he writes is also sort of formal at the same time. Like, of course, the very famous thing that he does is describe words in the books, you know, so you'll have a word here, a meaning. And what I liked about that was, I expected it from what I knew to just be like, he would literally just define a word, and that's great for kids. But what I didn't expect is that sometimes he defines it very plainly just because, yeah, it's a harder word, and then sometimes he uses it in a way that's not actually what it's supposed to mean, or it's something about like how we, you know, have a connotation with that word, or just the way he describes it in such a length that it ends up being funny. I did not expect that, and I really, really like that. So his actual writing of the books, I love, and I also love that the characters are these 3 children, really the 2 and the baby, and I like how they are so clever. Yes, they get angry and they freak out about things and they stress, but they do just remain like calm, and like, we're gonna figure this out. As a kid, I could see being like, I'm looking up to these characters because they just get through any situation. As an adult, it's a little bit different. But the thing is I think I can actually appreciate these books, not in but in a different way as an adult, because there are some things as a kid you will appreciate in these books for one reason or another. But there's other things as an adult that if I had read them as a kid, I wouldn't have gotten X or why the way he's writing it is so funny. So that's what's very interesting about it, is because it is written for kids, but it's also, I don't want to say it's specifically written for adults, but if an adult like had to read it to a child, they could come across a passage and be like, Now the thing that I don't love as much about the books, at least up to this point, is that they are very repetitive. Again, it's a kid's book. I'm giving that caveat right now because it's not really meant for me. I'm just reading them, you know, because I never did. But even as a kid, I probably would have been like, this is the same thing sort of over and over with different details. Now, I have heard from a friend that once you get past 5, it gets a little bit different. So I'm excited for that. And I'm obviously, I didn't ever say this, but I'm going to finish this at some point. But I wanted to start talking about them now since I had a lot of thoughts on them. And I think that even though it's a little bit repetitive, I do like the comfort that comes with that. But that being said, again, even though there are so many passages and just the general style in this writing that I love, it also is slightly limited by the fact that these are very simple stories for kids. He can only write so much so differently and so uniquely. A lot of it's going to be very standard sentences. Violet did this, Sunny did this, That's fine, because again, it's a kid's book. The other thing, though, is, and I get why this is so great for the books, but the adults, specifically Mr. Poe, are so ungodly annoying. Like, again, I shouldn't be getting this passionate about it. It's a kid's book, and that's completely the purpose, that adults are super unhelpful and they just get in the way, and the kids are actually the ones who are clever and everything. That's completely the point. But man, the way that Lemony Snicket is able to make Poe stupid in just a different way every time is actually impressive, and it frustrates me to no end. Now, I will say, I have seen the movie, and I do want to talk about that on the channel at some point, because I haven't seen that in a while. And I've also seen season 1 of, I think, 3 seasons of the show on Netflix. And again, just that whole style, I really like it. And I think that both of the forms, even though they're kind of different, the movie and the TV show, I think they do a really good job kind of portraying and bringing to life this very specific feel and style of the story. So for being kids' books, I definitely enjoy them enough that I want to continue on with them even as an adult, and I can appreciate what Lemony Snicket does here. It's very interesting, especially a kid's book where every single beginning has a letter going, "Don't read this, you're going to be so upset." And then the kids are like, "No, I want to read that." Like, it's really interesting. And yeah, I think that they're done really well, especially considering last year, I did The Thief Lord, and that was okay, but still a lot more kiddish. This one has obviously child elements in it, but there's a lot more that adults can pick up on. Okay, rolling right along into the next one, kind of actually seamlessly going into it, will be Coraline. Because, again, it's a kid's book, but there's a lot of adult stuff in it. Now, I read this because there were a few that I was debating I wanted to read around Halloween, and I was actually stuck in Barnes & Noble during a thunderstorm. I know, the best situation ever. Like, that is a dream situation. Oh no, it's storming outside, like, really hard. I'm surrounded by all these books. What am I ever to do? I just picked up Coraline, and I started reading it, because I saw it, and I was like, you know what, it's almost, like, October. I want to start reading something kind of spooky, because I wanted to do that last year. I think I read The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. But there was always so many things I'm doing during Halloween, I don't want to pick up something super big, or really, really long. So I started reading this, and I was like, it's kind of like the Series of Unfortunate Events. It's small enough that I can get through it really quickly. So I picked it up and started reading it, and then I bought it. Like, that was one of the most spontaneous decisions of my life. I need to do more stuff. Now, I have obviously already seen the Coraline movie. I watched that when I was way young, and it scared the crap out of me. All right, maybe not scared the crap out of me, but I was like, this is very creepy for a kid's movie. I remember seeing that trailer and being like, oh, like when the buttons come, like it was just like a fear just went straight down through me because of the implications of that. And watching that as 10 years old or something, it's like, no, there's something wrong with that. So I'm not going to talk about the movie, because actually I want to do that at another point in time. But I've always loved Coraline, and as I've gotten older and just watched more Leica and stop motion, I appreciate it so much more. So I was very excited to read this, and obviously, just look at this cover. So it just looks like her, right? But then you can see there's ghosts and everything coming out. It's very cool. It's a very cool cover. Now, the story itself, again, I already knew what the story was, but I wanted to see how it was written, how maybe it was a little bit different. And it's slightly different. Not that much, but slightly. There's things that they focus on more in the movie that I actually prefer. Now, this might be a case of just I saw the movie first, I fell in love with the movie, so any changes in the book, I'm going to be like, that was okay. Or I don't really vibe with that. But mostly it sticks with what the movie does, or I should say the movie sticks with what the book does. Except there was maybe 2 or 3 changes of, at the end when she's going to find the orbs. There's one that's actually in here. There's a hiding spot in here that's not in the movie. And that was one of the ones I actually appreciated. There was a cool little addition that I was like, yeah, you know what? That actually just makes a lot of sense that one would be in there. So I don't know why they didn't put that in the movie, but, I'm not going to fault the movie for that. And there was a couple other little things. That's just obviously little interactions and decisions that she makes. How many times I think she visits the world, stuff like that. Honestly, it wasn't really that different. It didn't make much of a difference to me. The thing about the book, though, that I wasn't a huge fan of, it might be the same caveat as it's a kid's book. So it might be the same caveat as Series of Unfortunate Events. But whereas with Series of Unfortunate Events, I'm like, all right, there's a lot of simple writing here. It's a little bit boring and, repetitive, but there's other stuff in it where I'm like, this writing style is also very unique. Coraline, I was surprised to find, was a little bit of like that same repetitive, just regular standard sentence structure writing, but that was it. There wasn't like anything super unique that jumped out at me. And this book actually got me thinking back to this mindset more of, if I was reading this for the first time, the writing is obviously very important. Writing is important in writing, just to clarify. But the story itself, no matter how you're getting there, unless the writing is just terrible, is sometimes, when you're reading for the first time, it's more important because you just want to know where it's going. You're not even recognizing how the writing is in some spots. So for me, having already known what the story was, that probably was a huge part of why it was such an issue for me. Because if I was reading this the first time not knowing, I'd probably been like, whoa, like, this story is creepy, this world is creepy, I want to know where this is going. But very recent, when I say recently, maybe in the last couple of years, I've gotten, in my own writing, on this very big kick of, when I write something, every single word and sentence has to be so interesting and unique. That's why I really like Fitzgerald over Hemingway, purple prose over dry prose. I like that more, but it's probably because, honestly, I've been writing this or working on the same things for the last couple of years that I'm not writing like a new story, so I haven't been focused on just the story structure or plot or where it's going. I've been focused more on the mechanics of it so much that's probably kind of bleeding into my reading. Kind of also into how I saw like Coraline herself. The decisions that she makes in the story are very interesting. She's a very brave person for being a child, but she gets scared too, and all of these things. And she's a very interesting character for sure in terms of her actions. But like her dialogue, general day-to-day how she was, the way she was written sometimes did feel kind of boring to me. And again, I think it's just, I already knew her character. I already knew she had blue hair and this raincoat, and she was very interesting and very, like, Dakota Fanning gives her kind of an edge, in rebelliousness in the movie. In this one, it just didn't feel that way as much. So I think this was just, for me, a problem of I already knew the story, so I had a lot of expectation going into it. That being said, for the fact that this is the first thing that came and not the movie, and I'm praising the movie so much, this is an incredible story. I love this story. Like it's so simple, but it's so effective, especially for a kid, because you're always wondering about what is that thing in the house? What's that, door? Where does that go? And it's a very cool, exciting thing. It can also be a very scary thing. And like the other mother, this sort of uncanny, this is my home, but it's not my home. That's a terrifying thing. And of course, the buttons and the bugs and everything in this world that seems like it'd be good for you, and it lures you in, and then it wants to kill you. That is horrifying. I can't even imagine having read this as a kid. That would scare the crap out of me. I think the scariest thing I read as a kid was The View from the Cherry Tree, only because that was like, he was trapped, this kid was trapped in the house with this murderer at the end. Why did they make us read that? But this, I can't imagine how I would have reacted to this, because, just these images alone, that was the other thing about this book that I really appreciate, is we got this really cool illustrations. Let me see if I can find it. I just had it before. Like, look at this. That's terrifying. You know what? You know what was the scariest thing I read as a kid? Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. The first one, and I think there was another one. But that is some scary stories to tell the dark stuff. It was a really good pick, I think, for the time, and having to be a shorter one, so I could, feel like I'm actually getting some reading productivity in here. And I am very interested to see other of Neil Gaiman's works and read those, because I know that, he's really beloved in the whole fantasy kind of weird stuff realm. And I think there's one in here called, it's like the Graveyard Book. Yeah, it's just called the Graveyard Book. And I want to read that one. Maybe once all of the stuff blows over with him, because I can't read any children's books without the authors screwing it up for me. Just gonna block that out for now. Okay, so taking a break from the books for a second, I read a bunch of short stories, and again, kind of a seamless transition because they were all around Halloween. Not only did I read Coraline, but I read a bunch of short stories as well. I read short stories from two different authors. One was Stephen King, and the other was H.P. Lovecraft. I have never read anything from either. That's crazy, I know. And I was starting to get really curious about horror in writing, because I've seen so much horror in movies, and it still can scare me, but a lot of times it doesn't anymore unless it's a very specific, terrifying movie. You know, I used to be scared by books, certain books as a kid, obviously, we just talked about that, but I kept wondering, now that I'm an adult, can like a book scare me? It's not like visual and, you know, audio and everything. I mean, obviously it's sort of visual, you're reading it, but it's not like a movie. I don't think any of these short stories or Coraline or anything is giving me like an effective answer for this year. I'm still gonna look into that some more, but I was also interested to see, not only is that the case, but what is the writing like from both of these guys in being some of the scariest writers to ever write. So let me start off with Stephen King. All of the short stories I read from him were from this collection of short stories called Everything's Eventual, and I read, again, I sucked, I read 2.5 of them. And the third one I didn't even finish, because I got them from the library, I had to return them, and the third one I didn't finish. It was the one I actually kind of wanted to finish the most. I started with Autopsy Room 4, and I'm not really going to go into them because I want you guys to read them on your own. Autopsy Room 4 is basically about a guy who is being operated on, but he may or may not still be alive. They think he's dead. And he might be dead, maybe it's a subconscious thing, maybe he's a ghost, maybe he really is alive. The ending is not only very interesting in, that answer, but how that answer comes about. And it was very funny. I wasn't expecting anything funny like that. But, you know, he just has, like, notes at the end of these short stories, and he was like, yeah, that just presented itself, and it was kind of funny, so I went with it. The rest of it, it's like, it's not, I mean, obviously the concept is terrifying, if that were the case, but the actual writing of it, once you're like, okay, this is the concept, this is, you know, the idea of it, gets to be kind of like, okay, yeah, they're gonna work on him, and then they don't. And then they're gonna do it, and then they don't. Most of the story is actually learning about these other characters, these surgeons, these people doing the autopsy. And I don't really much care. I just kind of want to know what's gonna happen to the guy. But, you know, so it was pretty good. And then there was another one that was called All That You Love Will Be Carried Away. And this one was about a guy who I think goes around selling stuff. I think he was like a door-to-door salesman. And he goes around the country, and as he goes around, he'll write down in this journal little notes and observations, specifically things that are written on bathroom stalls and you know, buildings, graffiti, things like that. And it was a very cool idea. I don't really know how it translates to horror for me. There is a very scary, very realistic, I guess, element to this story that I'm not going to tell you about, and it's something that he's debating, he's going back and forth on about something. I thought it was a really interesting idea. Again, I didn't really get scared necessarily by it. I think it was more so just like an existential thing, which I guess could be a lot scarier than just, you know, regular horror. And the ending for me, I didn't quite get it. All I remember is it's either very open-ended or very implied, but I still didn't really get the purpose, for me at least. And then the last one from Stephen King that I read, or the part of it, was Room 1408. And this one, I'm actually kind of scared to finish it because it's been built up so well about a guy who's basically going to check out a haunted hotel room and, you know, disprove all of the theories and everything. But I'm so intrigued as to where it's actually going to end up because it's been built up really well that, yeah, this place is like really screwed with people and people haven't left right or they haven't left at all and there's weird stuff going on. So that one I'm actually really curious, and that one could be one that's like, yeah, horror in writing is definitely, you can actually scare me with it again as an adult. So I will let you know, I don't know, next year how that ended up going, because I will probably finish it. And then the two real quick that I read from Lovecraft were Pickman's Model, which I wanted to read because I had this collection and I had just finished The Cabinet of Curiosities by Guillermo del Toro, so I wanted to actually read the story that it came from and see if I liked it better, because I didn't really love how it was done. It didn't really scare me that much, and I was a little bit kind of bored by it in the actual, like, episode that they did. And I will say I think it's because the concept itself is very hard to do visually, like to actually show it, because this is, I think, where writing really is superior to visuals for something that's like horror, is it leaves it to your own imagination instead of showing it to you. And I think that was a lot more well done in the story, because it's about these terrifying paintings. Now, these terrifying paintings at this point in our world, probably part of the reason it didn't work in the episode is because realistically, we've seen so much disturbing shit. It probably really wouldn't faze us. Back then, when it's set, it would absolutely. Even then, reading it now, if I'm just reading it and I don't have anything to see, and I'm just imagining it, the way that he writes, the detail, and the level of depth that he goes into how scary these portraits are, it's effective, because it leaves it up to your imagination and just this general idea of how scary something could be in art. So I liked that a lot, and where it ends and everything, I think I liked a lot better too. Again, it kind of implies more. And Dagon was the other one, and this one was very interesting. It's very, very short, but it has a lot of atmosphere to it, a lot of otherworldly stuff. I think that was really cool. There was a lot in here that was otherworldly but unexplained. And that's what was terrifying about it, is because there's just this setting. He just describes the setting and keeps describing it, and you're like, okay, I'm getting it, but also what is this? What is this planet I'm on? And then these, ancient beings come out of the ground and they do certain things, and you're like, again, like, I can see what's happening, but I have no idea what this means in a good way. Like, this is some old ancient ritual or something, and it was terrifying for that reason, because it seems so unfamiliar. And again, the unfamiliarity is also what makes things scary, even in writing. So I think that those were two really, really good ones from Lovecraft. Okay, on to the last two, and probably maybe my favorite that I read last year. Again, not a whole lot to rank or go off of anyway, but these were definitely, I think, my two favorite. And maybe not coincidentally, they were the first two that I read. This is actually the first book that I read last year, which was Slaughterhouse Five. As you know, I love dystopian just as much as I love fantasy. I've really come to love dystopian fiction. I've really wanted to get into Vonnegut because he is one of the basically fathers of dystopian fiction. He's one of the ones that everybody talks about. And I never read anything by him. I'm catching up on all of these. I have found that when it comes to stories, movies, TV shows, books, whatever, like, I'm not a huge, in general, war fan. Well, okay, I don't know who's a fan of war. I'm not a war... I'm not interested in it. But I find that they make some of the best stories I have ever read or watched. And the case with this one is so much more, because it's not just the war story part of it, it's other things with it. So it kind of is able to give you both at once. It's able to give you the horrors of war and a little bit more in the way of entertainment. Because if you've never read this book, the premise is, I guess, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to adequately explain this premise. There's a guy named Billy Pilgrim, and he is out of time. Stuck in time? Hold on. He's come unstuck in time. Basically, he time travels. Obviously, this whole book's a metaphor, so just take that, right at the beginning. But I don't know if actually in the plot, after reading the whole thing, I guess Billy Pilgrim's actually time traveling. I don't think this is in his head. I think it's a real thing. He is both time traveling and being abducted by aliens, and their realm of time is very different from ours, so he's able to time travel in that way. Half the book is about his time in the war, and the other half of the book is his time with the Tralfalmadors, who are the aliens that picked him up. I'm just going to start by saying I am not, after one reading of this a year ago. I'm not going to adequately be able to give you what this book is about, why it does what it does, the symbolism. There's so much in here. But what I can tell you is that it was a very entertaining book because of that conjunction, going back and forth, that juxtaposition between the two, and that even though I didn't get every single thing that was going on, I knew what they were going for, because the biggest thing about this book is that it's telling the horrors of war and being a war prisoner and seeing people die and things explode, all of that, and then coming back and your life is, normal, but it's not. All of those things, which are very standard in all these war movies and media, are told in such a different way because it's very matter of fact. The way that most of this stuff is talked about, it's like almost funny. It obviously matters, but because he's unstuck in time and he's just going through all these things, there's parts where like something's happening and then he just goes to another part in time and he's like, okay, like this, the writing, the tone of this book all throughout just feels like, yeah, it is what it is. Now on the alien side of it, the extraterrestrial beings, I actually, because it's me, I would have loved more of it. I totally get why, obviously, it's focusing more on the war. That's kind of the point of the book. I would have liked more of the alien stuff. It was just cool to see all of their, I guess not the world building, but just the cultural building of them and how they view time, and, him talking to them. And they weren't like hostile to him or anything. They were just kind of intrigued by him, and he was intrigued by them. It was a very interesting dynamic there. And then the war parts are, again, just they're horrifying. Just everything they saw and did, and how it's written so casually, even though lots of these things are just terrible. Turning to a random page, it just starts off, Billy Pilgrim was on fire, having stood too close to the glowing stove. And then later it's like, Billy wondered if there was a telephone somewhere. Like, what? I didn't pick that out to talk about. I just turned to that randomly, and that was the first thing I saw. So it's that weird, again, juxtaposition, not only with these two plots in the story, but with the two, like, the tones. I very much like this because, again, I love dystopia. Honestly, this is going to be dumb, but I just love the feel of this book. Like dystopian paperbacks that are, like, they're a little, like, more rectangular, and you can just, I don't know, that's the thing with book lovers. We just sit here and we go, I love how this feels, and everyone's like, you need to get a life. So I did really love this book, and I'm very excited to read more of what Vonnegut has in store, and just dystopia in general, because it's just how these things are told. We've just resigned ourselves to how this is now, so we're just like, yep, he's on fire. Okay, down to the last one, which I did save for last because I know that even though I wasn't ranking, this is absolutely my favorite book of the year. Where the year before it was The Girl Who Drank the Moon, this year it is another fantasy, and I mean this is like an instant add to my top 10. It is a book that I heard about. People kept telling me about it here and there. I mean, there's a million, aside from series, a million standalone books, and it's like, which one do you pick? But I had heard about it. I've always been intrigued by this premise and just even the title. Friends had recommended it to me, and I got it from the library. So it is literally the only book, like true book, that I read this year that I actually don't own. And I would love to own it immediately. That is The Night Circus. I fucking loved this book. I'm sorry. Every single piece of it was perfect. The atmosphere, the vibe, objects, characters, everything. And I am so mad at Erin Morgenstern because I'm like, save some for the rest of the writers out there. She has just an abundance of cool ideas, cool visuals, cool concepts, characters, dialogue, everything. This is set in, I don't know, I think the 1800s, late 1800s, I think. I could be completely wrong. I'm going to look that up. But basically, all I know is they're wearing top hats. It's that kind of, And it's set in this, kind of, it feels like Victorian. There's very classy parties going on, people in suits and dressed up and being fancy all the time. But they're fancy not in a stingy, like, I'm rich way. They're fancy in a very artistic, creative, we're going to have fun and be different and unique kind of way. There is this circus that only comes around at night. It stays for a period of time and then it's gone. And it has the wildest tents you could ever think of, because pretty much all of them, if not all of them, are magic based. But the audiences don't know that, so they think it's just happening. They think it's just real magic. No, they think it's real, not actual magic, but real sleight of hand magic. But a lot of it, most of it is real magic. But the reason is because there are these two apprentice growing up magicians, wizards, warlocks, what have you, and they are being trained, and then they're being pitted against each other in a competition, but they don't know who the other person is. They don't know why they're in this competition. All they know is that they have to do bigger and better. So that's where all these tents come from, because they keep coming up with new ideas. That is just the coolest freaking the aesthetic of this book, the circus. It's so like just the visual of the circus in the daytime is cool, because you can feel how looming and weird and daunting it is. And then at nighttime, it's fantastic. It's whimsical. It's everything. It's beautiful. It's lights and motion and tents and clouds and oh my god, like every single idea that was in this, I was like, man, that's something else I can't use. She just took everything, and it was so good. And not just the ideas in here, but the writing again itself. The writing is so beautiful, and it was so easy. This was the longest book I read last year, because it was like 350 pages, I think, or something like that. But I just breezed through this one. I loved it. Every single bit of it. It was magical. I'm not a big romance reader, watcher, whatever. Obviously, I love it in certain movies, but I don't go to a romance movie. I don't read romantic books. But this one, the romance was so well done because it's rooted in other things as well. It's rooted in magic and all that stuff. But the chemistry is just, it's there. It works so well. There's just these sleek, mystical things going on between the two of them. There's so many parts to this story. There's even like things that we go to that are outside of, there's all these B stories, one of which is a guy who's making the most wondrous clock ever for the circus. And I didn't think that they could pull off an ending that would be worthy of the rest of this book. It went sort of a different way, but I think it worked. I want to read this again. I definitely want to read this again. It's one that I want to read over and over and over, not for the plot necessarily, but obviously for that as well, but just for the writing. This is such a whole vibe of a book. I freaking loved it. This is like an immediate top 10 for me. It's beautiful, exactly what I wanted out of it, which doesn't happen all the time. I'm hoping to find something like that this year. Guys, if you like fantasy or romance at all, go read The Night Circus. It has every mood you're looking for, every object, every idea and cool concept. It's just so good. Well, those are all the books that I read last year, and even though I read not less, they were smaller books, I read basically about the same. I still talked for the same amount. I'm so sorry. My goal is to read 6 books again this year, because I'm hoping if I have that goal, I can read more. We'll see how that goes. 1 every 2 months. That's pretty doable, because I'm also self-publishing a book. So, there's a lot of stuff going on. I will mention there's one other that I started last year. I haven't yet finished it, so that's going to go on next year, so I'm not going to say what it is. But let me know what you guys, if you're into reading and books, which, probably why you're watching this, let me know what you read last year and what you're excited to read this year or have on your to-read this year. The gap of books that I have yet to read versus what I have read is like this. Like, I'm never going to read everything that I want to, but, slowly but surely, just keep turning those pages, and you'll get through it. And as always, keep your hopes high, your stress low, and books right in the middle. I'll see you guys later.